the blood of Jesus. It's nothing but the blood of Jesus, my Jesus.
But he also gave these commandments as a warning to us that you won't be happy this year if you break any of them. Any of them. And the first one, of course, says what? Thou shalt have no other gods before you. Now, I want to put this in layman's terms. That means where you can understand, kids. First of all, the Bible teaches there's only one God. There's not gods. Only one God. He created the heavens and the earth. He created the world in 6 days, and the Bible said He rested. He created man, and He rested. And then the Bible said He created woman, and I'll let you fill in that part however you want to. You see. But the point is, there's only one God. And what did God write this first thing? Said, thou shalt have no other gods before you. Because first of all, He knew these people that had been in bondage and slavery for over 600 years had been engulfed also in the culture life of the Egyptians. The Egyptians worshipped many gods. They also taught their people that Pharaoh, who was their king, was a god on earth. Now you may think that sounds silly, but there are still cultures that teach that even in the world today, that they believe that. The country, for example, Japan, taught their people that the emperor, that was their name for their king, was a god on earth. That's why in 1941, when they attacked America and they fought so viciously, they would not give up until this man sent the orders and said, we have to surrender. They would have literally fought to their death because they believed he was a god on earth. But the Bible teaches us there's only one God. Only one God. And the question comes today is, how do you make yourself a God on earth? And that's how a lot of people are doing today. Because they do what they want. They choose to do what they want to do. They say, well, I don't believe this. I don't believe what the Bible says, and I don't think God meant these things. And if there is a God, He wouldn't let these things happen anyway, and therefore I'm making the rules as I go. And that's okay for a society that's chaotic, and that's what we have, but that's not okay for what God wrote. So the first thing that God said was, thou shalt not have any other gods. Then secondly, He said, not to worship any other image. But once again, people say, well, I don't understand that. We don't go around praying to trees or whatever. You'd be surprised how many people in America today are praying to trees. I believe in protecting the earth. But don't you listen. I want you to listen. Get a close-up of me so you can see me. I want you to listen. I don't believe in worshiping the earth. But there's people today are teaching, even in schools and in colleges and universities, that we should worship the earth. They call it Mother Earth. Now, once again, God made the earth, and it is good, and I believe you should honor that and do your right to do the right thing. When we were in Canada years ago, one of the things I noticed about the Canadians, you saw no trash nowhere on none of the roads, or at least not the roads we traveled. We went for a long ways. I think it's really wrong to just throw things out and clutter things and make things look like a mess all the time. You see, I think that's wrong to abuse things. But listen, I never have read in the Bible where it said I get down and bow down to a leaf. Because it is made by one image, and that is God. So I don't pray to these leaves. I don't pray to the trees. I pray to the one who made the trees. There's a difference, you understand? But we've got people today that believe that you pray to the objects of this earth. Some people believe in praying to images made in the form of man. And they make different kind of... This was real popular, especially in the Old Testament. But it still happens today because, listen, anytime you put anything above the Lord, you are making yourself or something the God. Can I put it in layman's terms simply like this? God said, I have to be first in your life. I cannot be second in your life. You know, when I preached last week, the sermon, it must have been a pretty good sermon because in my knowledge of all the years of me preaching, Cheryl hardly ever asked for a copy of it, but she asked for a copy of my sermon last week. I was impressed with that. Because when you're married to somebody 29 years, you know, it's not that often. But I talked about how we have to be radically changed. We have to start thinking the way Jesus taught, not the way we have been taught by society and the world. Folks, listen. The world teaches that materialism things are what make us happy. Having nicer clothes and nicer things. I hope everybody in this room has already gone and rented the movie or have watched. If you haven't, I hope you watched the movie Gifted Hands, based on Ben Carson's life. What a wonderful story that is. And I do get pumped up when I watch it. I watched it last night with my son for a little while. And man, I mean, it just excited me for a young man who, with God, made so many miraculous efforts and changed the world, even as we know it. But one of the things he got caught up in when he was about a teenager was he changed schools and everybody was making fun of his clothes. I guess, you know, because he was a poor boy. His mother just cleaned houses. He had no father involved in his life. Father had become a bigamist and was married to another woman at the same time and had another family. And so he come home one day and he said, look, have you got any money, Mama? And she, of course, she was barely scraping the barrel. And she said, what do you need more money for? He said, I need to buy clothes. She said, well, you got clothes. You got nice clothes. Not the clothes what everybody else has got. See, that's our world today, isn't it? Especially with young people today. Why do you think commercialism is slamming young teenagers and college kids? When my daughter worked years ago over here at one of the factories, I can't say where, she worked at one of the outlets. She said these young girls would come in there, and the store basically catered to more younger people. And these girls would bring a credit card, and they would max it out for $800, $1,000, sometimes $2,000, buying everything in that store. And she would say to them, who's going to pay for that? And they would say, well, my daddy will. Now, you and I know their daddy didn't send them down here to the university to get dressed. He or she sent them down here, obviously, to get an education, didn't it? But you see, the world puts a pressure on people today to think, oh, you've got to be successful. You've got to look just the right way, don't you? You've got to drive the right kind of cars. You know, let's tell the truth. If you pulled up here today with a Ferrari or something like this, or one of those high-class, expensive automobiles, most people would look and say, wow, look at that. Or what kind of a house you were built. We were told this week at the Bible study we were in that a very wealthy man had made the statement in Horry County years ago that if heaven did not have a bigger and a nicer mansion than what he lives in, I don't think he wanted to go, or something like that. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? But you see, that's how the world is even today. It's even more so. We are pushing, boy, you're not successful unless you've got something successful. But the first two commandments hinge on this one thing. You're not going to be successful in God's eyes if you don't put Him first. And secondly, you don't realize that you can't have nothing above Him, and you don't need to make an image even of yourself. Listen to me. Have you seen that thing on the internet that you can Google? That they show a 100-year-old woman. I believe she's from Asia. And oh, she's so old and wrinkled and dried, and even her lips are split open. Just age has a time of processing. But computer generated, they can make her look like a 20-year-old girl again. And I was showing that some of the ladies, and you know what? Some of them said, man, I wish I could look like that for real. You could spend all the money in the world, and we're fascinated with ourselves again, aren't we? We are obsessed of taking care of our bodies, and that's good to a point, but it can become dangerous that you worship your body. Folks, listen, you can try it as much as you can, as young all you want. You can put the oil of Olay and lard all over your face or whatever you put. You can lose all the weight you want to, man, and it's probably good for you physically. I'm 100% for that, but it will still not change the fact that if you live long on this earth, you will grow old, you will get sickly, and your bodies will be meant to die. If that wasn't the case, a man named Jack LaLanne would have never died. Now, you kids may not know who he is, but when I was a young person, he was all over the televisions. He was the first guru, if you would call him, of physical fitness. You remember him, ladies? He'd come on during the soap opera times or something like that, and he'd be sitting there telling them girls, grab a chair and do this, kick your legs, move. Don't just sit there and watch the television. And he did live to be in his 90s and looked like he was in great shape, but he died. You can worship your body all you want to. I used to be really heavy, lifting weights through the years and got big through the years. And I used to go to the gym all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I remember one thing distinctively as I was even sitting over here at Gold's Gym, and I'm not making this up. I was actually asked to enter one of the bodybuilding competitions. I'd got that big. And I just noticed, man, these guys would get in the mirror, and they would, for hours, sit there and, and they always wanted somebody to look at you. They never did this in the bathroom where nobody was in there. They did it out in public. Well, you and I know why. And one old guy was Mr. South Carolina. He was a friend of mine. He even came over and spoke to the kids when I was youth minister. His name was John. And I said, John, what do you do? He said, is any of the girls around looking? You see, he had learned, sadly, to worship his body. Now, what's wrong with all this, preacher? Well, the Bible says the first 2 commandments was, thou shalt have no other gods, and thou shalt not make a graven image. Anytime, there's a good principle. Anytime that you obsess yourself, that you do less for God and more for whatever that thing is. It may be a job. It may be a career. I know people who will never miss a day's work because, buddy, they say, we got to have a job. We got to pay our bills. And I agree with that. And if they're sick, they could be running an awful fever, throwing up and all whatever, They'll go to work if they're dying. But boy, come to church, he's like, well, I don't want to come to church because I don't give to nobody. And if you're not careful, you can make your job an image. You understand? Am I right? You can make education an image. There's nothing wrong with education. But education can't save your soul. It may get you out of poverty. It may give you a better life. It may open up 10,000 doors. But it can't make you happy. See, when God wrote this, He knew what He was talking about. Because remember, the Scripture said, He made man. Well, if you make something, you know what it's good for, don't you? You know what it's good for. I've got a little white dog right now at the house. And she's a sweet little dog. We found her on the side of the road. She was beat all to pieces, and we've nurtured her back through the years. And we gave her to my daughter, and, she gets married, and we get the dogs and all that kind of stuff. And that's okay, But I told my wife the other day, if we don't find this dog a home, or we don't get her under training, I said, she's going to die because she's out. Guess what she's got in the bad habit? Running cars. And we've tried to teach her and teach her. We've tried to punish her. We've tried to take away things. I don't know what it's in with her, but buddy, when she sees that car coming, boom, there she goes. And now she's got poor little dumb Ralphie. He's my man dog, and bless his heart, he's like most men. Wherever the women go, he goes. He's like, oh, yes, let's run out there, I get tickled at him. I'm like, Ralphie, you used to not do that until... And he just looks at me like, well, what do you want me to do? She goes, and I follow. It's like typical man, I can see him getting killed one day, and he look at me and say, hey, what do you want me to do, And you and I know the inevitable, what's going to happen to that little dog. But now listen, see, I'm being a little silly because we've got some young people here. It isn't the same principle for us spiritually. If we keep ignoring the teachings of God, our nation will crumble. The Ten Commandments, they don't even want them on posters. We used to post them all over the post office. I remember as a kid, you go in there and see them on the post offices. Remember that? I never did go to court till I became a grown man to go with people, but they were always over the post, or the judge's offices are always over. Judge Roberta Gisson, she was a good friend of ours, and I went to her chambers one time, and she was a state supreme judge in South Carolina. She had 5 or 6 Bibles on her desk. What impressive. But now they say we take them off. But don't you understand, when we take something off, we forget what we're doing. And that's why it needs to be reminded. And that's why we're preaching on this. Lest you start making images of whatever else. Then the third commandment goes on and says what? Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. And I guess the worst people that do this, it seems like, that means to curse with a full oath. If you don't understand that, that's saying the G, and I'll let you finish it. And you say, well, what's wrong with saying that word? Well, first of all, when you're asking God to condemn something, that's impossible. He doesn't do that. That's not His nature. It's not within Him. God doesn't condemn anything. He condemns sin, but He loves the sinner. And the worst people I know that are doing this today is what? Television and Hollywood. How many of you go see a movie and it's a good movie, it's a funny movie, or it's got a good plot, it's a good drama, and all of a sudden they'll take God's name, and you sit there and I don't know about you, but I cringe. Now I'm going to tell you what happened even to me, that I never knew this was happening to me. When I was a kid, growing up, we'd go see the movies, and not too much. Matter of fact, my mother didn't really believe in going to the movies that much, because she saw then what we didn't know was the tyranny of Hollywood and the vile life they were living. And matter of fact, the only 2 movies I could ever remember until I was in the 6th or 7th grade, I went to see the Bible and the Ten Commandments. That's the only 2 movies I ever went to see. That's the gospel truth. First one, I think, was the Bible, and the second was the Ten Commandments. Over there at Elizabethton at the Bonnie Cave Theater. That's where I went to see him. But as you got older and you started sneaking out of the house and running around with your buddies and friends in high school, we started going to seeing all these movies that were real popular and taking girls out and all this stuff. But guess what happened? A few years ago, my daughter, who got married, as most of you all know, her and Justin had a little boy from a previous marriage, and they've got full custody of him. And he started coming over to the house, staying the nights with us, and he does that quite often, and we enjoy his company. And all of a sudden, some of these movies came on that I used to watch in high school, go to the movies. And I got to listen to what they were saying. I don't know why. You just do that, don't you? And the language. But you see, when I started going to them years ago, and I went to church, preached, it didn't affect me for some reason. You can get deceived real quick about using God's name. I hear people say all the time, oh God, oh God. They'll say, oh God, oh God. But the only problem with that is, are they really praying to that God, or has it just become a byword, a casual word? In the Old Testament, when God told Moses, the Scripture said when they ever spoke of God, it was in reverence and in respect and even fear. Because remember, they had seen what this God was capable of doing. Bringing plagues upon a nation, wiping them out with nature, splitting the Red Sea, causing a fire to come down between them and the Egyptians when they decided to attack them. They had seen firsthand the power of God. And we have not seen this for years, I don't think. We should. But the sad part is we take it for granted. But wait till you get in a bad car wreck. Wait till there's a terrible incident. Somebody pulls in with a gun and starts shooting. And this same God that people laugh at, mock at, and make fun of, guess who they call on to help? And buddy, they really get serious when they start seeing people die, don't they? And we've took prayer, and have been for years, out of school. You can't pray. But you let somebody go into a public school and start killing people, and was even the first official start saying, we better pray. Isn't that sad? Don't do that to God. His name is to be reverent and holy. And if you're in the habit of using this, I pray that you start getting out of that habit. And say, God, help me to take this language out of my words. And it's not just that kind of language. I could go on even with other language, can't it? It's filthy today. It's almost like they don't even know how to say anything unless they say one or two words, and it's unbelievable. And we were taught as children, people that use language like that are usually uneducated and ignorant. So we were taught. And my mother, who was an educator, and my father, who was a principal, would say, what do you expect? So I encourage you today. Number one, God has to be number one in your life. Is He number one in your life today? Is He? Is that what you think about the most, pleasing Him? What can I do to make my life count more effective? How can I be a better Christian? That's what His Son did. Jesus, even when He prayed the great Lord's Prayer, what was the last line He said? Thy will be. Now you think of that. Would you like to have God to acknowledge you one day as His child, and part of His family? Will you honor Him with your lips and your actions? Number two, you don't make an image out of anything. Nothing can again be above God. Your house can't. Listen to me. Your possessions can't. Your car can't. You remember, boys, when you used to get these cars and you'd shine them up and you'd polish them, and you'd take a girl out on a date and you'd put Armor All on the seat? You know why you did that? So when I grew up in the mountains, so if you took them curves real fast, and you always did, you'd jerk that wheel, and buddy, here she come, whee! And you always try to find left-hand curves because you say, hey. You never want to take down a road as all right-hand curves because guess where she going to be? On the other side. But the point is, man, I see people worshiping cars, boats, motorcycles. Gosh, I think I told you this story years ago. We was parking cars, raising money for the Promised Land when we used to have the big bike shows. You remember me telling you a story? Thousands was down here off of 17. And the guy, Mr. Mishu, had gave us the property to raise money, and that's how we built the Promised Land Church out there. And this guy pulls in with his wife, very attractive lady. He wasn't, to tell you the truth. He must have had money. It's the only thing I could figure. Because he fat and out of shape and ugly, you know. But anyway, that's beside the point. When he pulls off 17 to park where we were parking cars, it was a little gravel section there that the state hadn't paved. And you had to come off real slowly. When he did, he hit it fast, and his back wheel slid out, and he fell with that bike. Of course, fell right on her too and him. And we all run over there and helped get the bike up and helped get both of them up. And bless her heart, it had tore her leg all up. You know how you get them old road rashes. And she was bleeding, and I think we even had some of the gals there, and they was over there trying to doctor her up a little bit. And you know the first thing out of this guy's mouth was, he didn't say, how's my wife? You know what he said? My bike. When I was in high school, we had a lady that if ever was a saint, was Miss Ethel Ingram. Many times she'd come hear me preach when I started out preaching, and she'd be the only person sitting there in that little old country church. Wonderful saint. Kept the little church at Whitehead Hill going, literally when everybody had walked away. And I thank God it's a thriving church. Even though she's been dead for years, she set a precedent for people. I remember one time we had a big gospel singing there. A bunch of the churches gathered, all different, churches, different faiths on a Sunday night. It was great. It was wonderful. And she jumped in her car and had an old Falcon and pulled out on 19E there. When she did, she was in a hurry, and I guess she wasn't paying attention, and she pulled out in front of a car coming down the hill. And she saw it, and she swerved. And when she did, she went right back into the bank. The church sit up on a big hill. And when she hit that bank, her head went through the windshield. I mean, it went completely through it. It didn't have that old safety glass. It was an old 61 or 2 Falcon. And we heard the explosion and ran out of the church, a bunch of us, and she literally had got out of the car And she had cut her jugular vein right there. I mean, she'd laid it open. She had a white dress on. I was 12 or 11 years old. I still can remember. She had met us on top of the hill. She'd run out of the car, run up the road, and was running, and her whole front was covered in blood, and the blood was dripping off her dress. And it was by God's grace, a nurse, God bless an old nurse, was coming home from Carter County Hospital and come upon the wreck, saw her hit, and saw her run, and ran up behind her. She was chasing her. And she said, "Have you all got any ice?" And some of the men had brought bags of ice because we always had little refreshments after we'd sing with all these churches. And they laid her down in the old wooden hard pew. No carpet. And they packed her ice, and this woman sit there and pressed with everything in her for 30 or 40 minutes till the ambulance could come. And she survived. But you know what her husband said? I'll never forget this. He was a mean old crotchety. He needed somebody to get a hold of him. When he came up to the wreck, somebody went and got him. First words out of his mouth, he walked in, and here his wife is laying severely injured, bleeding to death. You cut this artery, and you're going to bleed to death in just a little bit, minutes sometimes. You know what the first thing he said out of his mouth, Sean? "You tore the car up, didn't you now? What are you going to drive?" Listen, my brother who was there and was huge and bigger than I ever was, about tore his head off. If it hadn't been for my poor old mama and grandmother who stopped him. I mean, he was going to take him out and wear his head out. And I'll never forget what he said. "What kind of a husband are you? Your wife is laying there dead, and you're worried about that old junky car." Now, why do I tell you this? That's the same thing it is with God. Materialisms, it don't matter what your car looks like. It don't matter what your house you live in. Folks, in the end, you don't take it with you. And it can't get you to heaven. The only thing, as the Scriptures and the Bible teaches, as you and I know, is your relationship with God. Put Him number one in your life. Your high school friends won't even remember who you are after you're graduated. They won't pay your bills, girls. They just don't. They ain't going to be your buddies forever, are they? And we worry so much as young people, trying to impress these people, make everybody like us. And in the end, the bottom line is we don't even like ourselves. I wish you could read the article that Miss Teen, South Carolina, who won it. She won for the whole United States. You see that article? She's right up here from Loris. Gorgeous young high school girl. Goes to Loris High School. But the first words out of her article in the paper was, she said, "My number one goal is to please my God." Now, I don't know who that girl is. I've never met her, but I would like to go and give her a hug and say, somebody's raised you with some sense. She said, "My beauty will fade. And this crown is, by the way, I can only wear it for a year and have to give it back." And she said, "I want to honor God." That's what we need to do with our lives. Let's stand.